Good morning, everyone, and welcome to my assembly. I hope that you're well, and I hope that your families are well, and I hope that you're starting to enjoy this easing in lockdown where you're able to go out more, see more people, and interact socially, which I'm sure that you missed for the 2 months when we really weren't able to do very much at all. As lockdown starts to ease, I'm sure that lots of you are now thinking ahead to when you return to school and what that might be like. And it's certainly something that I'm thinking about because I'm in school at the moment. As I talk to you now, I'm actually sat in my classroom, and everywhere I look, I can see evidence that you guys were once here. And to be quite honest, it's tinged with a little bit of sadness because whilst it's nice being in school, it's not the same place that it used to be. With the exception of a few students who are able to come in and work here, most of you aren't here, and it's you guys that make school special. So for the teachers that are here at the moment, it's a bit sad being back in because it's not the same place that we want it to be. Everywhere I look in my classroom, I see what I'm calling the residue of thought. The residue of thought, that word residue is a great word. And what it means is something that remains after most of a substance has gone or been removed. In other words, you were all once here filling my classroom with your thinking and your talking and your working and your social interaction. And you're not here anymore, but there's evidence that you were once here. Evidence in the shape of my wall displays. For example, this map of the world. And you can see some examples of student work surrounding it, work about different countries that they've been researching for their homework. There's evidence of you in these key words I've been using with my classes as we were learning about amazing environments and restless earth with year 8. There's evidence of you in the books on the walls, the textbooks that I sometimes use in my geography lessons, or a copy of Noughts and Crosses that I was reading with some year 8 students. And there's even evidence in the form of some of your exercise books that have been left here and weren't taken home. This is all the residue of thought. It's what's left behind, despite the fact that you're not here. It's clues that once this was a place of learning. And it's making me think quite a lot about how are we going to pick this up again when you return to school? What's it going to be like when you emerge from lockdown? Now, maybe your lockdown experience since the school has been closed has been one of anxiety and stress, trying to maintain all of the work that your teachers have been setting you, getting used to spending 5, 6, 7, 8 hours a day in front of a screen. Or maybe your lockdown's been like this and you've really not followed the rules and you've been going outside and interacting with friends and perhaps pretending that there is no work and that you don't need to worry about it. Either way, as we start to look ahead to what it's going to be like when we return to school, I'm sure that whilst there's lots of excitement, there's also a little bit of anxiety. Am I still going to be friends with the people I was friends with? Am I going to be able to keep up with my learning and my studies? Am I going to be able to interact in a classroom filled with another 27 people? And I want this assembly to be a message of hope. And to do that, I'm going to read to you a poem by this poet, Gillian Clark, who's a Welsh poet. And she wrote a poem called Miracle on St. David's Day. And it's an amazing poem. And it's all about what it might be like to return from a period of lockdown. And there's so much we can take from it. The only things you really need to know before I read to you the poem is the following. Firstly, that the miracle of St. David's Day is named after the patron saint of Wales, this chap here, St. David, who was living in Wales in the 6th century. And that in Wales, they have a national flower, and the national flower is called the daffodil. And a very famous poet called William Wordsworth wrote a poem called The Daffodils. Now, if you go to Wales in springtime, you will see the valley floors littered with beautiful daffodils. They come up at the beginning of spring, the end of winter, and they signal a new period, a new dawn, the end of the long, cold, dark winter and the start of the warmer weather of spring and summer, and they're a fantastic message of hope, these daffodils. And they're the national flower of Wales. Now, Gillian Clarke wrote this poem based on a real experience she had. She was going to an asylum, which is a hospital for people with very, very serious mental health conditions. And she would read to the patients in this asylum. And a true story, on St. David's Day, there was a time when she was reading to the patients, and a man who had not spoken for 30 years stood up and word perfectly recited the poem The Daffodils by William Wordsworth. And that's why the poem's called The Miracle of St. David's Day, because this man who had never spoken, he'd been in his own lockdown, he'd become a mute, was able to, for the first time of speaking in 30 years, recite an entire poem that he knew from memory. This is the poem, Miracle on St. David's Day. An afternoon yellow and open-mouthed with daffodils. The sun treads the path among the cedars and enormous oaks. It might be a country house, guests strolling, the rumps of gardeners between nursery shrubs. I am reading poetry to the insane. An old woman, interrupting, offers as many buckets of coal as I need. A beautiful chestnut-haired boy listens, entirely absorbed. A schizophrenic, on a good day, they tell me later. In a cage of first March sun, a woman sits, not listening, not feeling. In her neat clothes, the woman is absent. A big, mild man is tenderly led to his chair. He has never spoken. His labourer's hands on his knees, he rocks gently to the rhythms of the poems. I read to their presences, absences, to the big, dumb, labouring man as he rocks. He's suddenly standing, silently huge and mild, but I feel afraid. Like slow movement of spring water or the first bird of the year in the breaking darkness, the labourer's voice recites the daffodils. The nurses are frozen, alert. The patients seem to listen. He is hoarse, but word perfect. Outside, the daffodils are still as wax. 1,000, 10,000, their syllables unspoken, their creams and yellows still. 40 years ago, in a valley school, the class recited poetry by rote. Since the dumbness of misery fell, he has remembered there was a music of speech, and that once he had something to say. When he's done, before the applause, we observe the flowers' silence. A thrush sings, and the daffodils are flame. What an amazing poem. This man had been silent for over 30 years, very similar to your lockdown, a place of withdrawn silence. And yet he emerges from it, able to recite word perfect this poem that he'd learnt in school. And this is my message of hope for you. When you return to school, just like this gentleman, you're going to be able to reconnect to all those things that you've been doing before you went into lockdown. You're going to be able to pick up your learning again. I have no doubt. You're going to be able to pick up your friendships again. And you're going to move forward into this new dawn, this new time post-lockdown. So I want to end it there. I'd encourage you to go back to that poem. If you go into Google, you'll be able to type in Miracle on St. David's Day. And I'd encourage you to read it again, because I believe it will bring you hope as we approach the end of this period of withdrawn lockdown and start to look ahead to what life will be like when we return to school.